Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's talk with Professor Suhrud Rajguru, who is an Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering and Otolaryngology at the University of Miami and is also the co-founder and Chief Scientific Officer at Restor-Ear Devices. Apart from being an educator, he is also a scientist, entrepreneur, and author of numerous peer-reviewed publications, and also a named inventor of several issues and pending patent applications. Before we let Professor Rajguru take over, I would like to establish a couple of housekeeping rules we like everyone to keep in mind. Firstly, please remain muted and with your videos off during the session. Secondly, kindly do not annotate on the screen when Professor shares his screen. And lastly, you may send in your questions in the chat box. The latter part of this session will be used to pose your questions to the professor. Thank you, and Professor, you may continue from here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tara and Rajiv, for organizing this and for inviting me to talk about biomedical engineering. So as Tara said, I'm a faculty member at the Department of Biomedical Engineering and also Otolaryngology, so ENT, at the University of Miami. I've been here as a professor since 2011, so close to 9 years already, and continuing. And I just wanted to share with everybody here a little bit about biomedical engineering, what biomedical engineering is about, and what are the career opportunities, what are the pathways through biomedical engineering. Now, many of you may have heard about the term biomedical engineering. Some of you may not have heard about the term. Some of you may have heard it as a bioengineering or medical device engineering. Many different terminologies, but essentially, biomedical engineering is an approach where we blend, as we'll see, a lot of different disciplines together to impact human health. So many of you may know about Elon Musk, for example, and his new company called Neuralink. They are developing new types of electrodes, new ways to connect with our brain, wireless technologies, electrodes that can be implanted in the brain, where they can pick out signals and potentially treat all sorts of neurological conditions. Many of us know about medical imaging. For example, this is an MRI machine. There are a lot of advances that have come in this technology and in this field, which allows us to image everything in our body, everything from bones and tissues to brain and different organs, as well as to even smaller scale within things within our cells, right? Within specific cells. A lot of different advances have come in there. Many people know about, like, cardiology. We know people who may have received these things called stents or devices that are put in place to unblock arteries, right? So that blood can flow appropriately. This is a biomedical invention, another biomedical invention that many of you may know about, right? People know about, of course, like, radiology and how we look at, for example, like, different kinds of tissues. People know about operating room. There are a lot of different ways in which technology is being used in operating room all the time. And again, that's an application. There are many applications of biomedical engineering to be found here. And one of the latest things that's happening right now in world over in terms of operating rooms and modernizing them is bringing in artificial intelligence as well as visualization. So 3D visualization, as well as, like, sort of moving into augmented reality, so that we can take away a lot of the screens and things like that that can distract the surgeon and allows them to do the operation and pull up any patient data that they may want. So there's a lot of new, very exciting things that are happening in this area. This is a like a small part of our brain that has been lit up, different cells that are being shown over here. And again, like, a lot of new techniques in which we can probe different areas of the brain, different areas of our heart, different areas of our muscles, for example, to understand that. A lot of cool things happening in terms of developing humans on a chip. So how can we build a lung or a heart? on a chip, not only for transplantation in the future, but also to understand how different kinds of drugs react with all these systems so that we can mitigate any potential adverse reactions that may happen, right? And a lot of work that has started from like, putting just a simple cell on a chip or on a plate, all the way to now building organs. There's a lot of work going on in 3D bioprinting, meaning not only 3D printing different parts like we used to do in terms of, plastics or different kinds of machine parts, but also now printing different organs themselves, right? Different kinds of cells that we can print together and make complicated organs. A lot of basic science research, which is part of biomedical engineering. So again, like, all of this work before it can come into patients has to be done on cells or on other species so that we can understand what the risk and what the opportunities are, and we can refine the system and bring it to patients so that it can benefit human health. Different ways of looking at cells, for example, taking stem cells and creating different kinds of cells out of it. So you can make neurons, or you can make heart cells, you can make muscle cells, and you can not only understand them, but also start thinking about treatment for patients who may have conditions from which there is no return, right? We thought that, a lot of this was impossible just only 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, there's significant advancements in terms of understanding all these cells. And again, all of these are examples of biomedical engineering, what biomedical engineers do every single day in their life. So a lot of, you may have seen like, different terminologies that are being brought up here, like, biomechanics. So how do we build prosthetics that help people? Thinking about something very simple that allows an amputee to regain some function of that arm. And that can be anywhere from a simple mechanical device that connects with their lost arm or a lost limb, for example, all the way to robotic arms that we can now control just with our thought, right? And developing that and being able to help them with that. Medical imaging, as we said, deep brain stimulation. How do we allow somebody who has a spinal cord injury, who cannot walk, to be able to return to some sort of function, right? Whether that's just simply just being able to grasp a cup of water to be able to drink that, all the way from being able to type something on a computer and or with a pen, right? So a lot of different things coming there, a lot of biomaterials. So how do we make different kinds of chemicals and different kinds of materials that can be used, for example, from building those stem cells all the way to building those little stents that I showed that can be placed in the heart, or different kinds of devices that can be placed to make sure that our heart continues to function, or replace a lung, for example, right? Photonics and biophotonics, how do we bring light, laser technologies, things that we understand from a very different area and into biomedical engineering to, again, improve different parts of health. So biomedical engineering can mean a lot of different things. Again, starting from surgical devices to everything that impacts eventually in some way patient healthcare. So what is biomedical engineering? Biomedical engineering, in a way, is very difficult to define, right? Because you need a lot of different disciplines that need to come together and be able to impact eventually human health. So you need to understand not only math and statistics, how can we design experiments, biology and medicine. You need electrical engineering because you're going to build devices that need to deliver some kind of an energy. We need computer science because we need to mine all this data that we are generating. We need to bring in physics because we're eventually building things that require, like, mechanical or physical knowledge of the systems. We need chemical engineers, people who understand how to make new kinds of polymers that are going to become sort of a backbone of a new kind of an organ. Material science. So all of these things, and even things I'm not listing here, they all need to come together, right? Now, a biomedical engineer can come to be a biomedical engineer from all of these different areas. They don't necessarily need to be defined as a biomedical engineer. I can tell you just within my own department, we have 16 different faculty, 16 different professors, and they all come from very different backgrounds. They either had undergraduate degrees called biomedical engineers, or they were electrical engineers, or they were biologists or chemists who came into this area, right? And we all, in some fashion or the other, work together to form a very interdisciplinary science called biomedical engineering. Typically in biomedical engineering these days, there are two different ways in which people approach this. There are undergraduate degrees, whether it's BTech, Bachelor of Engineering, or Bachelor of Science, depending upon which education system you're in. You can get an undergraduate degree called biomedical engineering or bioengineering. There are also pathways through graduate degrees. So you may be a chemical engineer who is interested in understanding how to bring like these principles from chemical engineering to help human health. And you may pursue a graduate degree, whether that's a master's of engineering, master's of science, or even further in terms of PhD or MD. And you may pursue a graduate degree in biomedical engineering. And that allows you, different career pathways depending upon what path you choose over here. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So in terms of biomedical engineering, this is just, one curriculum that I just wanted to kind of briefly share with all of you. So just at University of Miami, which is where I am, and in the Department of Biomedical Engineering, where I teach undergraduate and graduate students different things, we have different concentrations, and I'll tell you a little bit about them. But this is the most difficult and stringent undergraduate degree, for example, at University of Miami, and that's not uncommon. Pretty much every university that you'll go to, biomedical engineering requires the most number of credit hours, meaning the most number of courses that you'll take, given that you need to be an expert at so many different things. So many different disciplines, but also because it requires a certain amount of a technological development of different skill sets that you need to bring. And it remains one of the most challenging, but also one of the most rewarding in my personal experience, as well as having worked with many hundreds of students over the past 9 years. At the university, I can tell you that this is a very challenging but a very rewarding career and an education pathway. And most of the first 2 years in the U.S. system, they're called your freshman and sophomore years. In India, maybe your first year and second year of engineering that you do. Those courses seem very similar to across all the other engineering disciplines. So you're going to take a lot of courses in calculus, in physics, in chemistry, in engineering design. Some courses in biology and things like that, some courses in electrical or mechanical engineering. And those are essentially similar. Even when I was a student 22 years ago at the University of Mumbai, it was the same essentially pathway where the first 2 years are common across all different engineering disciplines. But it's the last 2 years when you start to become a proficient within biomedical engineering that things change. So you may choose a pathway that is in tissue engineering, for example, cell and tissue engineering, where you want to understand how cells behave. How do you recreate cells? How do you understand their functionality? And how do you sort of define those medical systems so that a physician or a pharmaceutical can be applied, for example, over here, right? Or a physician can do a transplant. And in there, you're going to learn a lot more about cellular and molecular systems in a very deep level. You may choose a pathway within biomedical engineering that is mechanical engineering. So you'll learn a lot about mechanics of solids. You'll learn about fluid mechanics, engineering design. How do you build different types of materials and systems that is based in mechanical engineering disciplines. You may choose a pathway through electrical engineering. I myself, in India, when I went through 22 years ago, biomedical engineering was just part of essentially electrical engineering. And so we learned a lot about signal processing, medical imaging, medical devices or instrumentations, different microcontrollers that can be used in these systems. Or at least in the United States and United Kingdom and others in Europe, a pre-med, a pathway into medical school that is also offered through biomedical engineering. And what this is that here's where you learn a lot about the anatomy, the medical systems, the physiology, et cetera, the biology and the genetics. And you learn about that in an engineering discipline, and you bring that into your next stages of your career, which may be medical school. So what was my path? I just want to tell you very briefly what my own path was, and maybe that will serve as an example of, like, what was feasible 22 years ago, and how that pathway has changed. So I grew up in India. I grew up in Mumbai. I lived there the first 21 years of my life, and since then I've lived the rest of the same amount of time in the United States. I grew up very close to Vile-Parle, this area where it was the site of the first McDonald's at that time in India that came. And I ventured not very far from there to this high school that taught us everything in my mother tongue, which was Gujarati, right? I did not learn math and science in English until I went into 8th grade, but I'm very proud of that. And then again, as at the time I was very risk averse, so I did not go very far. I went just a few kilometers away to an engineering school called Dwarkadas J. Sangvi Engineering School. And this was one of the first schools, colleges of engineering in India to offer biomedical engineering. At the time when I joined biomedical engineering 22 years ago, there were probably close to 15 or so departments across all of India that offered biomedical engineering. And within Maharashtra, there were only 90 students that went into this program. And I was one of those 90 students at the time, right? And since then, now there are more than 160 different programs, including 2 IITs that offer biomedical engineering. And there are many thousands of students that are going into this pathway now that you can choose. So I went there, and as I said, at that time it was much more of an electrical engineering. At that time, all of these other concentrations in cell and tissue engineering or mechanical concentration, et cetera, did not exist. We mostly learned electrical engineering. We learned about medical devices and medical imaging, and I took that knowledge and I said, I need to expand that. I want to really expand that. So I took a long flight. At a young age, leaving my family and moved to United States in a state that many people at the time did not even know existed, and that's that Utah, Salt Lake City, which many people may now know. But at the time, I remember when I told my family and friends that I'm moving to Utah, they said, like, well, is that part of California? And I said, no, California is a different state. So, I moved to Utah, Salt Lake City, a beautiful location. The university, as you can see in this picture, is nestled in the mountains with snow-covered peaks for 6 months of the year. I went into a program called bioengineering at the time. And I studied biomechanics in a very different way. So I wanted to learn something about how to apply mathematical principles into human health. And so I started to learn about biomechanics. I developed mathematical models of a system of tubes in our ears that allows us to keep balance. And we developed a mathematical model, and we modeled a disorder that is very, very common called benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. It causes a lot of dizziness and a vertigo in patients. And through understanding the fluid mechanics of this system, we understood what this disorder was. And since then, we've been able to positively impact how it is diagnosed and how it is treated. And at the time, my interest was also piqued in neuroscience. I wanted to learn something more about the brain. And so I started to learn about experimental ways in which we can connect with the brain. How can we record signals from different neurons in our brain? So I started to do that. And then when I finished my PhD in 2006, I said, I need to explore a little bit further. I want to go further, deeper down into this area of neuroscience and learn a little bit more about where I can apply my knowledge that I've gained through these 6 years of PhD and 4 other years of doing my undergraduate degree. So I went to different places, and now I'm in Florida. And so first I went to Washington University in St. Louis. I was there for a couple of years learning about different areas of the brain where this information from our ear goes and allows us to understand at every single moment where we are in relation to a room or a wall or in relation to gravity, for example, so we don't fall down, right? And the brain is constantly using that information. Then I went to Northwestern University in 2009 and 2011, and I worked with somebody who was developing a new type of medical device, a new type of cochlear implant that used lasers to stimulate neurons, to interact with neurons in our brain, so that we can give a perception of sound to deaf people, right? And I got all of that knowledge and moved in 2011 to University of Miami to start my own research, to conduct my own research and also pursue an education of other students and teach other students about what I had learned. And I've been here since 2011. And I have a very active research lab, where we have a lot of PhD students who work in the lab, scientists who work in the lab, physicians, undergraduate students who come and train in my lab. And we work across the United States as well as across in Australia and others with people funded through federal agencies as well as private industry partners in developing medical devices and applications in the inner ear. So very briefly, I'm not going to bore you with all the science here because that's not the purpose, I think, of these talks. But we know that within our ear, there's something that allows us to perceive sound and allows us to keep our balance. And that these are these organs on the right-hand side that are deep nestled within our ear in our bone behind our ears, called the cochlea and the semicircular canals. And these are the organs with which we interface with. So we build devices that work in this area and return perception of balance or perception of hearing to patients who have lost it. So on the right-hand side, what you can see over here is the size of the human inner ear, the part of the ear that allows us to hear and keep balance relative to a finger, right? And that's how small it is. But without this organ, people are deaf, people cannot stand, people cannot maintain balance, and they fall down, right? So there are significant issues with that throughout age spectrum that we have. And we're trying to understand, not only understand disorders that affect that, but build devices and applications for treating these patients, right? So as I said, I learned something about how light can stimulate neurons, how light can activate neurons, and how we can talk with them, how we can talk with our brain and send some signals. And so we build devices that actually return this perception of balance to patients, right? Through that. We build devices that allow cells to be protected. So you can see over here, in the middle are these little tiny hair cells, right? This is one part of that cochlea. So we have peeled down even further into cellular level. And we build devices and strategies, pharmaceuticals that allow these cells to be protected so that we can continuously hear, right? We don't lose our sense of hearing. And we use all sorts of tools. So we use imaging, we use medical devices, we use lasers, we use cooling, we use genetics. So we use whole genome sequencing to understand what these cells are made of and what's happening to them when something goes wrong, right? And how can we reverse that? So we do a lot of different things in this. So coming back to this broader idea of biomedical engineering. So where can I go when a student decides that I want to pursue education in biomedical engineering? And these are examples that I am giving you. This is a real life example. So I asked, as I was preparing for this, I not only asked all of my colleagues here who have gone through this pathway, but my own classmates from 22 years ago. And I asked them, where are you now? Where have you ended up 22 years later? What are your careers? And what you can see is that they've gone into many diverse careers, right? So they've gone into medical device industry. People are president of specific companies. They're leading their own companies. They're doing research and development. They are in sales, they're in marketing, they're field engineers, they're working as biostatisticians or data scientists. Many of them, like me, have gone into education or research. They are professors, lecturers, they are deans and administrators of different schools. Many people have gone into government. So, a government of India, just like every other government, requires health policies to be determined so that these can drive our economic policies, for example, right? So in specifically in this time, what happens during COVID? What happens with the virus spread? How do we limit that? What are the other policies we need to do? So people who are biomedical engineers and biomedical scientists are the ones that are advising governments to understand, like, how to create policies because of these, right? People have gone into medicine and become doctors. People are working in clinical research. How do we understand, like, what kind of drugs are going to work and benefit patients, right? People are reporters. People are technical writers. They're leading new initiatives, for example, with the Gates Foundation, right? Et cetera, to try and understand, like, how do we impact human health at a global scale? So not just at a local scale, not just at our state level or country level, but at a global scale. What are the challenges and how do we bring knowledge of this to people, right? And again, as biomedical engineers, as biomedical scientists, we have a very deep understanding of not only the biology, but all the different ways in which people are trying to understand these conditions. And the best part about that is the skill set that these students develop, right? So the students that leave just our program at University of Miami, they not only understand biology, health, and diseases, but they can design experiments. How do I design an experiment to help understand this particular disease better? People can solve complex medical problems. So no medical problem, no human health issue is simple. There's a lot of different things that need to come in together over there. And there are economic parts of it. There are the family aspects of it. There are health issues. There are other regulatory agencies, things that need to come in. And so to understand how all of this comes together to help a patient, that's where, like, biomedical engineers really have a very deep skill set that they can bring. There is a practical experience in medical research, right? And biomedical engineers are very effective communicators because, again, they need to be able to not only speak a language of a physician or an engineer, but also of a biologist or a chemist, right? Or a mechanical engineer. So there's a huge amount of technical expertise there that we can bring in. And most of all, biomedical engineers tend to be self-learners, right? So learning never stops really anymore. And so I've seen biomedical engineers, my own students, like, graduate from our programs and gone into many new different areas. So if I was a student, if I'm one of the students listening to this right now in high school, in ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and I'm thinking about, okay, maybe I want to pursue some career here. What should I do? And this advice is, not just for biomedical engineer, but in general, what should you do? Ask a lot of questions. Lots and lots of questions. Find people like myself. Ask your parents to find you people, right? Ask your friends and colleagues to find you people who understand, for example, biomedical engineering. Go and find doctors, right? And ask them lots and lots of questions. Find the right people and mentors who will guide you. Research, and I sort of put parentheses around read, but it's the search, right? Nowadays, Google, social media provides you platforms in which you can find so many different things that was not possible 22 years ago, right? Use social media, but use it wisely, not just for Instagram, right? Like, go on Twitter or go on YouTube and find videos about what is biomedical engineering. What are the ways in which I can get involved? What are the kind of research people are doing? Where is this field going? And then most importantly, understand your values and your skills. What are my skills? What are my values? I want to help human health. Well, I can be a biomedical engineer to help humans. I can be a police. I can be a politician by creating, specific health policies and bringing a change that way. I can be a doctor, right? But not necessarily that match my skill set. When I joined biomedical engineering, I was told, like, just like many students in India, well, you should become a doctor. And, I wanted to always help humans. I wanted to always learn something about the body and bring engineering principles to it. But I necessarily did not want to go into a medical field. And so I chose this pathway, which allowed me to connect with that same field, but from a very different sort of a perception, right? Very different pathway. Leverage all the resources you have available. So these days, there's no reason not to be able to search things on Google and find the people, find the resources. In my day, I remember one of my best friend and I, we were both very interested in following up additional research that was happening everywhere else, and we had to take train and bus to go to IIT Mumbai, enter their library, ask for permission for using their books at the time, and look up the 10 books that were available on biomedical engineering, right? And nowadays you can just type on Google biomedical engineering and there are millions of websites that will guide you. So use those resources, use your family, use your friends, right? Ask your family and friends and parents to help you find these right people. Do not get discouraged or be afraid of rejection. Right? Failure is a part of life, and we all learn through failure, and we always come out stronger for it. And I'm a firm believer in that. Don't let your degree define you. As I said, not everybody that got the biomedical engineering degree with me stayed in biomedical engineering. Some people are working with Amazon in cloud services. Other people are running their own software companies. Other people are in finance and management, right? But they use the skill sets that they gained through this and are using it in many different ways. Do not stop learning. Always be learning. There are so many online education platforms that are free world over now. I know most of you have probably heard about these MOOCs, right? Large online courses that are developed by many universities across the world, and they're free. And never lose sight of your goals, right? Like, what is your goal? If your goal is to learn something about human health, to understand something about a human condition and help them, keep that in mind. Keep always that in mind. I have always followed that passion. I continue to follow that passion. And despite all the obstacles that come my way, I continue to pursue. I continue to work really hard to make sure that I can reach that goal of helping patients, right? And so I'll bring you back to this last slide before we go into any question and answers there might be. As I said, there's a lot of stuff that has already been done, but there is a lot of stuff to be done, right? Human health, human condition is an evolving thing. There's so many things we still don't understand. There's still so many things that are part of our brain we don't understand, part of our heart that we don't understand. How do we help these patients? How do we help people? How do we help everybody that's born from an infant all the way to somebody who is our grandparents' age with something that may be very simple or highly debilitating? How do we help these, right? And that's where biomedical engineering, biomedical science really comes in. And we need more people in this field to come in and come up with new ideas, new innovations, new technologies. And that's what I highly recommend. If you're interested in something like this, look up biomedical engineering and bring that passion, bring that engineering skills that you want to develop, bring that sort of interdisciplinary team and work with people to positively impact human health. So with that, I'm going to end over here, and I'm going to turn things back to Tara, who can bring up any specific questions that may have come up.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So our first question is, how far are we from seeing wearable devices that can check for blood glucose and other things without breaking the skin?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there is a huge amount of work that is being done, as you know, in this area. There are huge challenges too, right? As you said, like we want to create something that's wearable, something that's not going to require penetration of the skin or the skull to interface with something, and getting some information about blood glucose, for example, or recording signals from the heart, recording signals from the brain remains still challenging. There's a huge amount of data that's being generated. So there is electrical engineering skills that are required over here. There are material skills that are required so that we have biocompatibility, meaning that those materials, polymers, electrodes, whatever we are designing in terms of these devices can be worn for a very long time. But you can see that we're already there, right? So for example, if you look at the Apple's new watch, Apple Watch 5, right? That pretty much works as an EKG system. We can put it up on our wrist, and it continuously monitors our heart rate, and it can actually detect arrhythmias. It can detect bradycardia. It can give us warnings, right, about things. It detects many different other biological parameters. There are ways in which we can just put, a cap on our head, and there are ways in which people have started to detect all these different deep brain signals from patients who may be even in coma, to understand, what is the state of consciousness. So all of this is coming. There's a lot of new work that is being done. As I said, one example is Neuralink. They have developed a way in which they can record hundreds of channels of information from the brain and transmit it wirelessly across a room, right? So again, there's a lot of stuff that's coming, and it will keep coming, and we'll see a lot of new things that are coming in this area.
Hi, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So for biomedical engineering, is there career options that would be available after undergrad, or would you have to pursue further education to get a job?
No, absolutely. I think that's a great question, and you don't necessarily have to pursue further education. You don't need to go get your PhD. You don't need to get a master's or anything like that. You can take your biomedical engineering undergraduate degree, and majority of our students. So just at University of Miami, biomedical engineering is the most popular engineering discipline, right? So we have every single year we have 60 or so students that come into biomedical engineering. Close to 70% of them don't go into medicine or pursue higher education. They end up going out into different kinds of industry. So they go into, for example, working with regulatory agencies. They go working with other companies as field service engineers, as software developers, as R&D, into research and development. So you absolutely don't need to pursue further education. There are a lot of jobs, a lot of career options that are available. But again, as I said, it significantly depends upon what your interests are, what your passions are, right? So I have students who have pursued, for example, what we would call a very typical pathway. So they'll take their biomedical engineering degree, and they'll go work with the orthopedics company, or they'll go work with Johnson & Johnson, or they'll go work with Medtronic into medical devices. But then there are other students who are very interested in thinking innovatively about how they use this specific knowledge from biomedical engineering. So they have, as I said, they are now scientific writers. So they write for newspapers. They write stories for newspapers, right? They are into developing health policies. There are people who have gone into becoming lawyers after this. So they take this knowledge, become lawyers, and then now they are doing patent law, meaning that for any company that wants to build medical devices, the intellectual property needs to be protected, right? And so they write laws and patents around those medical devices. But because they have the engineering knowledge, they have the biology knowledge, they have the medicine knowledge, and now they have the law skills, they actually bring it all together and now actually are working in patent law. So there are very innovative career pathways that we can take. I'll read some questions that are being posted on chat. So Dr. Mehul Doshi has asked, what is the scope of biomedical engineering in India? So that's a great question. And again, in 22 years since I was a student, it has grown significantly, right? I remember at the time when I graduated, there were very few jobs. L&T used to have a medical division. IIT and others used to have some faculty positions or research positions that you could go into. But they were very scant. There were not a lot of opportunities at the time. But now it has significantly changed. There's so many different startups, so many different medical device companies, even from a cochlear implant industry, right? Cochlear implants are being implanted in deaf children all over India. So there's a lot of work that is coming in that area, in implantable devices, right? So there's a huge amount of growth that has happened in the 22 years in this area of biomedical engineering. engineering. I have people who have trained with me, who have done research with me and gone back, and now they're not only working in different medical device areas, but also working as professors in different universities in India, right? So again, there are a lot of new opportunities that have come up. So that's a great question. There's another question that was asked: what is the primary difference between biotech and biomedical from a career perspective? And from biotech, how do we make a transition to the medicine track? So this is a very good question, and sometimes things get a little confusing because they sound similar, right? So biotechnology is significantly different from biomedical engineering. Biomedical engineering, as I said, is things about human health from more of a device, a research, a some kind of an interaction that happens directly with the patient perspective, right? Biotechnology can mean anything from taking an understanding, like how do we build a specific type of, for example, polymers or materials or something like that that can go into developing specific type of plastics, right? To sort of bioagriculture or something like that. So there's very different areas, that kind of overlap in here. The question about how do we go from biotech, something that's more biotechnology, into biomedical or medicine area. Now that requires a little amount of sort of like, understanding and working and learning of how to bring your skills from one area to the other, right? There are, as I said, there are skill sets that you develop regardless of what you pursue. You can always take those skill sets and learn new things and add it on. So you will need to learn a little bit about the biology. You will need to learn a little bit about, like, for example, how cells or different molecules in our system behave, different neurons behave, if that's the area you want to go into, and then understand how the brain works. So you'll need to supplant your knowledge from biotechnology with this knowledge of medicine so that you can bring it over. You don't necessarily need to know everything about engineering. You don't need to learn all of the math, right? And as I said, that's exactly the beauty of biomedical engineering. Is the typical engineering. Typical engineering, we tend to think that there's a lot of math, there's a lot of physics, there's a lot of sort of just, understanding engineering drawing. But as I can tell you, my colleagues, my friends don't necessarily come from there. They come from very diverse backgrounds, and they bring that into biomedical engineering. So that was another question. Another question from Vansh Agarwal is, what is your opinion on the entry of artificial intelligence in biomedical engineering? That's a great question. And again, like, a huge area of development world over, essentially. So as we know, like, artificial intelligence is coming into every single aspect of our life. It's coming into not only, like, things that we purchase off of online, and understanding, like, how companies like Amazon or Facebook or Twitter are mining our data, but into biomedical devices and biomedical engineering, biomedical sciences. How do we use artificial intelligence to mine all this huge genomic data that we are generating now, right? So as we understood what the DNA was, like, only a couple of decades ago. And since then, we have come so far that for a couple of $100, right, to $1,000, I can get my entire genome sequenced, and I can have this huge library of genome from millions and millions of people world over. But now the question is, how do we understand what that data is showing us, right? And so artificial intelligence, data mining, all of that is coming into play. So clearly, computer scientists, people who can develop computational models, people who can understand how to use biostatistics into these approaches, and bring it into this, and sort of like, mine this great amount of data that we are generating, is really sort of like, I think the next phase. As I said, like, in operating rooms, right? Artificial intelligence and virtual reality are coming into play. So at a time when a physician is doing a surgery, how do they mine the data from a patient to understand an adverse reaction, right? Like again, like, maybe artificial intelligence someday will get to a point where it will warn the physician even before something adverse was to happen, right? So again, there's a lot of really interesting things that are happening in artificial intelligence and in sort of data mining, and students that are interested in this. I by no means I'm an expert in this, but if anybody that's interested in it, I think that's a great career choice. That's a great area to work in, and a lot of new opportunities, job opportunities, are going to come up in there. Shilpa John has asked, where would biomechanics fit with biomedical engineering? Yeah, so that's a great question. And then I think, like, in particularly in India, like, a lot of times when we think about biomechanics, we think about prosthetics, right? We think about how do we replace sort of artificial, like replace lost limbs, right? And build devices for that. But biomechanics really is a lot broader than that. So prosthetics, building mechanical devices to interface with the body and return some function of a limb is one aspect. But then there are many other aspects in which we can use biomechanics or principles of mechanics to understand how does blood flow through specific arteries and veins. What happens over there, right? How do we build these stents so that the blood can flow and not create coagulations, right? Or like block our arteries. And so how do we create a balloon that is used to sort of open up these arteries and these blocks, right? During sort of transcatheter positions. Two, understanding, like, how does oxygen get into cells, right? So if you're thinking about patients who have spinal cord injury, right, or disc compression issues, and we want to deliver oxygen to these cells so that they don't degenerate, they don't die, right? There again, biomechanics comes into play, because you need to understand, like, what are the mechanics of this system? What are the mechanics of the fluids around it? How do we send, these different molecules and things like that over there? So the field has, like, a lot grown significantly beyond just, like, the initial sort of, like, things that used to happen in the field of biomechanics. And again, there's a huge growth in biomechanics areas. There's a lot of different medical device companies that have come up, and they are very, very successful. So you think about, like, the heart valves, right? That's a biomechanics example. Artificial heart, that was created at University of Utah, like, close to 30 years ago. And that's a mechanical device. That's a biomechanical device. So again, that's part of biomechanics within biomedical engineering, right? So again, there's a lot of different things that are happening. And the follow-up question that you have, that's exactly where I was going. What about biomechanics in the sports industry, right? So sports industry, as you know, has gone a lot of interest from biomechanics perspective, because again, there are things about physics, right? So whether that's playing cricket and trying to make sure that you hit the ball in a certain way, and your body position and your follow-up is a certain way, right? That involves a certain amount of understanding of the sort of like the body kinetics and the dynamics of it, right? And so hence the biomechanics. Two, things like rugby or American football or even soccer, where we know that girls who play soccer are at a significant higher risk of brain trauma from trying to hit the ball, right? And we understand now what are the biomechanics over here, right? And so bringing in and thinking about, like, what are the mechanics that go into, making girls more susceptible to brain trauma while playing soccer, right? Or during a collision or something like that. And how do we build maybe different kinds of helmets or different kinds of treatments? How do we diagnose it, right? How do we use body mechanics to kind of adjust it so that we can reduce the impact when you have a physical collision, for example, or something? So again, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in sports industry area. And again, many of these people that are working in this area are students that have graduated with biomedical engineering degrees through that mechanical concentration that I told you, right? Or they may be going from electrical concentration or from tissue engineering concentration, just being able to understand those kind of kinetics and dynamics and sort of bringing those principles into that. So I really like that question. Great question. Uma Ramesh has asked the question, how do these pandemic situations bring about new forefronts in these areas? Again, that's, it's on everybody's mind right now, right? I mean, the COVID-related pandemic and the situation, how, what the epidemiology of that is, how is it spreading, right? How do we tackle it? Is wearing a mask appropriate, right? What are the biomechanics of that, right? Like, when you sneeze, like, what happens with the dispersion of the particles, right? And what are the mechanics and what are the physical principles associated with that? If you have large droplets, small droplets, how far do they go? How do they break when they hit a surface? All the way to once I have it, right? Once you have COVID, how is it affecting the biology? How is it affecting our systems? How is it affecting the lungs, for example? Or for example, the brain. Again, there is a lot of different parts over here, a lot of different biomedical scientists that are working to tackle that problem, right? Governments world over have gone into this. The people that are advising them, right? So in the United States, if you follow, like, even in India, I'm sure, like, if you follow, like, you hear the name, like, Anthony Fauci a lot, right? Like, he's one of the world's leading epidemiologists, like, who studies this. And he's the one who is advising the government in what steps they should take, right? Same thing in India, right? There are people who are in health and policy management, like, they need to be advised by people who are biomedical scientists who understand what happens on the ground. The policy needs to be informed by the science. And the scientists and the engineers are the ones who understand the principles behind that. So I foresee that following this pandemic, there is going to be a huge growth, sort of an exponential sort of explosion of interest in not only government investment into education and sort of, like, research in these areas, but also from the public, right? We all want to know. I want to know. I know all of you want to know. Like, how do we prevent this? How can we create, surfaces that can make sure that the viruses don't stick on it, right? So that requires the knowledge of not only the virus or the physical surface, but being able to create, like, things that you can coat the surface with so that now the viruses won't stick, or when the virus comes in contact with this, you can kill that virus. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on that's going to be needed to be understood over here. And essentially people that are in biomedical science or biomedical engineering industries, they are the ones who are going to help us sort of reach these conclusions and these answers, So again, I foresee that there's going to be a huge growth in this area, much needed growth that will come about. I see that Anjali was trying to write a question. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question if you want to. But anybody else too, please feel free to unmute and ask the question. I'm happy to answer. All right. Well, there being no more questions, like, I again, want to thank the organizers and 5 a.m. Career Studio for organizing this. I think this is a great initiative to bring expertise from different areas. And then I hope, I wish you the best success in bringing more knowledge and more information and more resources to our students. Like, and I wish I had this 22 years ago when I was a student in India going through this. I was lucky that, my parents, my father knew physicians and faculty and professors who were working in different parts of the world, and they were able to connect me with them. And they were kind enough to take the time and meet with me and sort of give me even advice over the phone. And that's how I ended up in Utah. And then, since then, to all different parts of not only the U.S. but the world, learning new things. So again, like, if you are that student right now, make sure that take advantage of the resources you have, okay, and leverage that to really understand how you can blend your passions and your skill set and the resources and sort of bring together and bring about a new career. So, all right. Thank you very, very much again.
Thank you, and good night, everyone.
All right. Good night.